What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Awesemo.com NFL Strategy Show, Week 4 Matchups Edition. Dave Loughran with me, as he is every Thursday. Matt Savoca on Twitter at Draftaholic. Give the man a follow. Hit me up as well at Loughy_D. It's LOUGHY_D. And we're here talking 12 games for the Week 4 season. For the week
not 13.
I should say. What's that?
Not 13, but 12.
Not 13. Would have been 13, but you've got Pittsburgh and Tennessee postponing this one till later on in the season. I was really hoping that we were going to get some doubleheader Monday night action, maybe even a little Tuesday night football. DraftKings, FanDuel throw out some $1 million prize pools for the showdowns again, but unfortunately, that won't be the case. We'll have to wait till later in the year. COVID-19 in the Tennessee Titans locker room, or in the organization, I should say, 11 players / personnel have tested positive. We'll see what happens from there. Hopefully football continues as it has been, because that would be devastating if it doesn't. But until the world collapses, I've been saying we were going to have sports since the beginning, Matt, and I stand by it. These they're going to do everything they can to play, okay? Multi-billion dollar league, which is the NFL. They're going to do what they can to play. Not too worried. Wasn't that worried in April, so I'm certainly not going to lose my shit over it now. But even if I'm wrong, even if I'm right, no matter what, every Thursday you and I are going to be here breaking these matchups down anyway.
That's right. Even if there's just a few, we're going to get to it. But yeah, I completely hear what you're saying. And I actually made a prediction right as sports kind of shut down in March that one of these major leagues were actually going to help funding a rapid test because there was so much financial risk involved. And sure enough, the first rapid test that came to the market was helped in funding by the NBA. So these leagues have a lot on the line. We certainly wish everyone their best health and all the best, and we don't want to take anything lightly. But from a scheduling standpoint, it's a little bit crazy. We're certainly going to miss that matchup, but we're going to get it down the road.
Well, we're happy to have everyone with us. As always, hit that thumbs up if you're just walking in the door. It's the easiest way to help us, support us for free, help us get out there to more people. Fight that YouTube algorithm, that pesky algorithm, and continue putting content out there each and every day. So subscribe, hit that notification bell as well. Greatly appreciated from all of you. All right, let's dive into it, starting with Matt. The New Orleans Saints, the Detroit Lions. There are a lot of high totals on this slate. This one, no exception. 55-point total. New Orleans Saints laying 4.5 points on the road against the Lions. But really when you're looking at both totals, 29.25 for the Saints, 24.75 for the Lions. Even the Lions have a hefty total, around 25-point implied total, still decent, even with the amount of points we've seen scored through the first 3 weeks of the season. Let's kick it off with the road team, New Orleans Saints, expected to get Michael Thomas back in the mix this week, which means Drew Brees will have two elite targets in Alvin Kamara and Michael Thomas to feed against this Detroit defense.
That's right. I mean, what can we say other than Alvin Kamara is back? One of the coolest plays you'll see all season in the second half of that game, that long catch and run for a touchdown. And getting Michael Thomas back is one of the most important pieces in the NFL for Drew Brees. You saw the offense kind of sputter a bit on Sunday Night Football against Green Bay. I mean, they put up plenty of points, but it just didn't seem like they had a number one option. And sure enough, Michael Thomas back on the slate, huge high implied total for the New Orleans Saints. He's projected as wide receiver 2, actually wide receiver 1 on Awesemo.com, but he's wide receiver 2 in salary. So you could even say there's a little bit of value in going for Michael Thomas this week only. That's a little bit of a stretch. One thing I will add, though, is the pace of play for Drew Brees has been a little bit slower than we've seen in previous years. They rank middle of the pack in true early down pass rate as well as early down air yards per second, which combines pace and play and air yards. So I actually see this game as a possible it's overvalued. You might take the under here because of that 55.5 point total. It's huge, but certainly lots of points going to be scored. Or we should expect it at least.
One aspect of this game that I find fascinating is if the Saints are going to have a lot of attention paid to them, and that's currently the case. Alvin Kamara getting north of 27% projected ownership. Michael Thomas set to make his triumphant return, looking at 12.6% projected ownership, which at the wide receiver position is actually relatively high. On the flip side of this one, the Detroit Lions, Kenny Galladay around 9.8%, but you've got Marvin Jones super low down there at 5%, Matthew Stafford at 3%, Hawkinson less than 3%. I don't believe the run game is going to be able to get a ton going against the Saints. I am a little bit intrigued by the Detroit Lions. And then the cool thing about this is if you're stacking this game and you wanted to take the alternate route, meaning Detroit, you're still going to be running it back with one of Alvin Kamara or Michael Thomas. And I love that because there are very few offenses that have as concentrated as targets as the New Orleans Saints. But I think you could say not to the same extent, but similarly, the Detroit Lions and Matthew Stafford really aren't going to target a ton of different receivers. It's Galladay, it's Marvin Jones, and it's TJ Hawkinson. So I think because there is such a concentrated amount of targets going to the guys that we essentially know are going to be getting the football, it makes life a little bit easier to figure out how to work a stack here, especially if Detroit's going to come in very low on.
Yeah, well said. I have in my notes here that I'm definitely going to be trying out tournament options with the Lions stacks going on. I was really encouraged with the amount of snaps that Kenny Galladay played. He emerged from his first week of the season playing in week 3 unscathed injury-wise. And if you look at the entire season for Matt Stafford, it looks like he has kind of a flat distribution of targets. But as we kind of talked about last week, with Kenny Galladay back in the mix, it really just looked like a more consolidated offense, which is exactly what you hinted at. Don't forget about Danny Amendola. He is still going to be involved in this offense. They clearly run specific plays to get him involved and open underneath. But it looks like there is a lot of value here, especially if you think this game is going to hit its total or possibly the over.
Yeah, no question. And the ownership is going to play a role for sure. It always does. We always take that into consideration. But ultimately, I do think Matthew Stafford will be able to move the ball. And here's another interesting tidbit. Pro Football Focus, we're only through 3 weeks, but they do contextualize this stuff. They make it so it's factoring in everything and not just how many points and how many yards they've allowed. The Detroit Lions and New Orleans Saints through 3 weeks are tied for 30th in pass coverage. So, yeah, I know it's a little bit surprising, but the Saints have not looked particularly good at defending the pass. Tom Brady looked bad himself in week 1, and I almost blame that more on him and being uncomfortable with the offense
than I do.
Right? Yeah. Then I give credit to the New Orleans Saints. But they coughed up 37 points to the Green Bay Packers. Aaron Rodgers had a very, very solid game, super efficient. And Derek Carr, lest we forget, and Josh Jacobs dropped 34 points on the New Orleans Saints. So, yeah, they're allowing I think they're allowing 30 points per game this season. That's not to say they won't improve. I think they will. But it is to say that I'm not worried about the Saints defense as a unit that is going to completely stymie Matthew Stafford and his passing game. So that's where I'm looking at right now. And I love Kamara. I love Thomas. I get the ownership, but I just think there's going to be unlimited opportunity in this one, even if we do anticipate it potentially going under. How else would you round this game out?
I guess I just wanted to add here that the Lions players are priced up, which is going to make stacking them a little bit difficult. I see Kenny Galladay's.
I thought they were priced down.
Oh, really? I have Kenny Galladay here at wide receiver 18. I was looking at the Awesemo projections. He comes in around 25. Marvin Jones is a little bit lower here at wide receiver 37 on DraftKings salary and wide receiver 38 in the Awesemo.com projections. But Hawkinson's also a little bit bearish projection-wise versus his salary. He's priced up a bit. But in this case, what you're really aiming for is a game situation where the scoring gets to a point where 55 seems like a conservative over-under, and we could get there by the second half with these two quarterbacks. One thing, I was taking notes on the Cardinals versus Lions game last week, and clearly Stafford is much more comfortable in the offense than he was even just a few weeks ago with Galladay back. he had a phenomenal fourth quarter drive where he actually threw a long bomb of a touchdown to Marvin Hall that got called back. Didn't matter. He came back and got them to a game-winning field goal anyway. So one thing I'll also add, too, is that Jeffrey Okudah, their number 3 overall pick this year, is playing really well, had an amazing diving catch versus Kyler in the second half. And if that defense can stymie the Saints, who are trying to work everyone back in, maybe there are some contrarian ways you could play this. But I think it's a game environment we want to attack for sure.
Yep, absolutely. I guess the only reason I'd say maybe underpriced is the wrong word, but last week, the Lions actually had a lower implied total than they do this week, and the over-under in that game, I believe, was actually a point or a point and a half lower as well. It might have been the same. And Kenny Galladay's price came down this week. Marvin Jones came down. TJ Hawkinson came down. So if we were looking at them as overpriced last week, then you could still say, yeah, they're definitely overpriced this week. But it appears that they've been priced down a little bit because of this matchup. And I'm still willing to get there. They're not going to break the bank. And again, Thomas and Kamara just are just going to allow you as a run back option to feel really good about this in the event that Detroit does happen to go off and you hit that stack. Chicago, Indianapolis, as we move this one along, Matt, the Bears getting 2.5 points at home. This game has a 44.5 point total. Mitch Trubisky benched at halftime after halftime last week. Nick Foles came in and clearly wrestled this job away from Mitch Trubisky with his second half performance, making a big fourth quarter comeback. The Atlanta Falcons have now blown two consecutive 15-point leads in the fourth quarter, which is brutal. Oof. And Nick Foles, meanwhile, in one half of football, threw 16 of 29, not particularly efficient, but 188 yards, 3 touchdowns, got picked off once, and Allen Robinson really came alive. I know I think we both really liked Robinson last week. 10 of 13. By the way, Allen Robinson had 6 for 64 in the first half. So it wasn't necessarily Nick Foles that brought this out of it. Basically had the same yardage in the first and second half, just managed to get into the end zone in the second half, and almost twice had they not ruled that an interception. He's 6,700. We can start it off with the Bears. Anthony Miller is still an enigma, and it's really difficult to predict what we're going to get out of him each week. He scored, but again, only 5 targets, 41 yards. Snap count still limited. How are we approaching the Chicago Bears?
Well, first of all, we're excited because we got replacement Nick Foles, meaning good Nick Foles. When Nick Foles comes in as a replacement quarterback, that's when he starts to go off. And it's just one half of a sample size, but he put himself in tier 1 of the quarterback composite efficiency metrics that I look at on the Awesemo.com data deep dive. So he just put himself right in line with Mahomes and Russell Wilson. Again, just one half of football against a Falcons defense that seems to make a habit of collapsing. We're not getting ahead of ourselves, but it was exciting to see, especially for their number 1 options. In regards to Anthony Miller, I think the answer is he's just good. And he's just not being used well enough. Maybe it's to protect himself. Maybe he's nursing injuries. We know he's been injury prone over the year. But the amount of usage near the goal line, which is resulting in touchdown production, is probably, it could be variance, but it's probably a sign that he's good. If he got more usage, he would be even more exciting. Well, we certainly like the usage for Allen Robinson. He's 7th in true opportunity share. He's the leader in the Bears targets by a mile. And even though he's priced at wide receiver 7, I think when you look at the upside, especially for tournament rosters, I think you could see him getting you to a 150 or a 200 point score easily, especially if the Colts show up on their passing game as well.
Allen Robinson's one of the foremost elite receivers in the league that doesn't get credit for it in most cases because of where he plays, right? Somebody like you or myself, we see Allen Robinson, and I would imagine most of our viewers too, and say, hey, this guy's really good. But on a national level, you don't hear about Allen Robinson ever discussed in the same conversation as a Julio Jones, right? Or even DK Metcalf gets talked about more than an Allen Robinson, which is fine. But the simple point to be made here, and you just eloquently laid everything out, he's been peppered with targets no matter who's in there, because any quarterback is going to look to lean on an elite pass catcher like Allen Robinson. He's got 31 targets. He's averaging 10 plus targets per game over his first 3 outings. They've gotten matchups against Atlanta, New York, and Detroit. Pretty easy spots. I guess the biggest question here is, how much respect do we have for the Indianapolis Colts defense, who, in all fairness to Chicago, it's not exactly like the Colts have played a murderer's row of offenses in the Jets, in the Vikings, in the Jaguars.
No, and we almost need to contextualize the entire defensive statistics of the Colts for those 3 opponents. It's a little bit of disrespect for the Jaguars, who do have a winning record at this point. But we saw them basically turn the game into garbage time by turning over Sam Darnold within a few minutes of the game starting. So the game script there is just something we can kind of throw out altogether. That said, we have seen Nick Foles and or Mitchell Trubisky implode in these ways before. We're probably going to see a little bit of increased ownership because they're the defensive touchdowns for the Colts defense. But with the low point total, I think, just to go back to the Bears for one moment, I think there's enough about game environment, at least from a casual perspective, that are going to scare people away, that going for these number 1 options in Foles and Robinson could really help you. Again, it's just something we can lean on the usage. If I showed you the usage statistics and didn't tell you the team, you would be absolutely thrilled to play these players. T.Y. Hilton comes in pretty well on the Awesemo.com projections compared to salary. And same with Nyheim Hines. Jonathan Taylor is right in line with his salary, but Nyheim Hines actually comes up about 9 points higher on the rankings there. So that might be a way to pivot as well.
Pro Football Focus has the Colts ranking number 1 in coverage this year. Again, we talk about contextualizing things. They are still likely going to be a good defense. Number 2 in overall defense. There are some good things to be said about this Colts team. They're a good squad. I don't deny that whatsoever. I don't think they're a juggernaut, though, in the sense that they're going to, be preventing teams from scoring more than 10, 11 points like they did. I mean, Kirk Cousins did that to himself. They did a good job of being opportunistic for sure and picking him off. But Kirk Cousins had a brutal game, and then Sam Darnold is just truly as bad as it gets right now. I'm not as high on Chicago, though, to come full circle here, as I have been in other weeks. I have enough respect right now for the Colts. I think Nick Foles is an upgrade from Trubisky, but I'm just to throw this out there. I don't think he's that big of an upgrade. I'm not entirely sold on him. I've seen a lot of Nick Foles in my day. The guy can make some plays, but he got benched for Gardner Minshew in Jacksonville last season, and there are some elements of his game that are still very weak. Will he be able to supplant Mitchell Trubisky and be better statistically and better for his pass catchers? I think so, but I'm not enamored with anyone here, and you guys will be happy to know that I will not be going back to David Montgomery this week. I'll cut my losses. I'll go 1-1. Nailed it week 1. Week 2, not so much. So
even with the injury to Cohen, do you see a little bit of an opportunity, a sliver of hope for him to get enough usage everywhere on the field?
So that's kind of the thing, right? Week 2, week 3, one of the reasons I liked him was because Tariq Cohen wasn't getting usage to begin with, right? In week 3, Tariq Cohen started being worked in a little bit more before this ACL injury, which was, I shouldn't say it was unexpected, but it was a lot different than what we saw in weeks 1 and 2. Cohen saw a combined 3 targets through the first 2 weeks. He saw 6 targets in week 3 and 2 attempts on the ground. I do think you'll begin to see David Montgomery worked in a little bit more in the passing game, but there's no way that Tariq Cohen, that in Tariq Cohen's stead, there's no way David Montgomery is going to play a potential 8 target per game guy. But do I think he can be more involved? Sure. I just don't think this is the week that I want to get to him. I do have enough respect for the Colts defense to where I think he could struggle on the ground, and I don't want to rely on him to produce through the air in order to get me what I need.
Now, let me ask you one more question about that. What do you think the probability is higher, that David Montgomery gets the Tariq Cohen level targets and he gobbles up a little bit more of the opportunity share, or Cordero Patterson gets the Tariq Cohen looks, basically taking away from David Montgomery. What do you think is more likely?
I think you're going to see my personal opinion on this is I think you're going to see a balance. I think David Montgomery could be, when the season comes to an end, you and I might be here on week 17 saying, yeah, David Montgomery averaged 4 targets per game or something along those lines. That's probably where I see it. Again, I don't see him supplanting his production entirely. He's not the same type of back. But can he catch passes? Yeah, he can catch passes. Can he be involved out of the backfield? Sure. He's been targeted 3 times in 3 straight games. So I think you're going to see some 4, 5, 6 target games.
Yeah, I think the ceiling's higher there.
I don't see him being Tariq Cohen. What about you?
Yeah, I completely agree. But one thing I also noticed is when Tariq Cohen left the game, they were using Cordero Patterson in a traditional running back position. They were putting him in the I form. They were putting him behind a fullback. So they're clearly thinking of him as a secondary option in their backfield. Of course, we know what he can do in the screen game or in the passing game. He's been very effective over the years. We also saw them re-sign Artavis Pierce. Ryan Nall ran a couple of routes, so there might be some added usage for him. Yeah, I was kind of baiting you a little bit. I think the probability of Montgomery getting that extra usage is low, and they're just going to increase Patterson, and maybe Nall or Pierce gets a few more looks.
Carolina, Arizona, unless there's anybody else from the Colts that you want to talk about. We should probably spend one more minute on Jonathan Taylor, right?
Sure.
$6,600. Once again, I would expect to see a decent amount of ownership here. Right now, Jonathan Taylor coming in at, let's see here, only 8%. Whew. Okay, so let me throw this at you. 8% makes sense. People look at the Chicago Bears defense. They have some respect for them. This game has a total sitting around, what did I say, 45 points, 44 and a half points. Mm-hmm. So, expectedly low output from both teams in this one, more so Chicago, but still the Colts. Is Jonathan Taylor reliable enough to get those carries and put up big numbers? Because, hey, we saw Jordan Wilkins get carries in these games. They were winning in blowout fashion. So if you're actually talking about who's going to get fourth quarter carries in a game that's competitive, and right now the line suggests this game should be competitive, it's very difficult for me to believe that Jordan Wilkins ends up getting anything. Check this out, right? Jordan Wilkins had 9 carries, I think it was, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, 9 carries in week 2 against Minnesota. 8 of them came in the second half. 5 of them came in the fourth quarter. Last week, he had 3 in the second quarter and 8 in the, 3 in the first half. It was the second quarter. And then he had 6 attempts in the second half, 5 in the fourth quarter. If this game's competitive, Jonathan Taylor is going to soak up the large majority of that second half work.
Yeah, well said. And we've only really seen one game script situation, which you're describing, and that's where they were up by 1 or 1.5 possessions, as you would say, and they needed to run out the clock in the second half against the Vikings. And what did we see? Jonathan Taylor, 26 carries, hits the 100-yard rushing bonus. So that's their identity. That's how they want to play. They want to have shutdown defense. They signed Xavier Rhodes this year, and he made a play last week. And it really is why there's a low implied total, not to mention the Bears, of course. But they would rather just get up by a little bit and run the clock out. So Jonathan Taylor, from a usage perspective, doesn't scare me at all. It's just the game flow environment. And if we get good Nick Foles again, if they're coming back, we might see more of those secondary backs.
Arizona laying 3.5 points at Carolina, 51-point total here. Carolina with an impressive and decisive win last week against the LA Chargers. I think that surprised a decent amount of people to knock them off 21-16. Mike Davis was targeted on 45% of the routes he ran. In contrast, Christian McCaffrey was targeted on 15% of the routes that he ran over the first 2 weeks before being injured. Do I anticipate that continuing? Not necessarily, but I do think Bridgewater is going to lean on Mike Davis, who's been targeted 17 times over the last 2 games. Man, that makes things a little bit interesting. it appears that he's also getting a little bit of interest as far as ownership goes as well. 19.5%. He's coming in as the 8th highest owned player on this slate.
And it shouldn't surprise anyone, really, because of his price. He's priced down at running back 17, and especially in full PPR formats like DraftKings, he's fundamentally mispriced. He's getting the usage like 2019 Christian McCaffrey. We're probably going to see it from 2020 Christian McCaffrey, and we still may later in the season. But the amount of targets, even before you include the running game opportunity, is just too high to ignore. So from a floor and ceiling perspective, at 5,700, needing only 17 points to get you 3x value, he really looks like one of the strongest plays on the slate. Yes, you're going to be dealing with huge ownership, but even in this game script, I really like Mike Davis from here and until he is replaced by McCaffrey once again.
Talking about the rest of Carolina, DJ Moore, very, very popular. 27% projected ownership. You can check all of our ownership projections, player projections out at awesemo.com, by the way. Awesemo.com/join. We've got everything for anybody, no matter what your budget is. And by the way, the Express Pass, we beefed it up. We added all of the Showdown ownership, Showdown projections, Showdown rankings, Showdown top plays, all of that into the package. So all of the Showdown slates every single week. The Express package, $3.95 per week. On top of all of the stuff that was already in there, now we've got the Showdown stuff. Every bit of Showdown content we have for NFL is now included in the NFL Express Weekly, which, by the way, if you haven't done so yet and you wanted to get a look behind the curtain before deciding to jump in, we've got some free content today, which on the site, usually behind paywall, NFL Showdown ownership rankings and the ownership projections for tonight's game between the Denver Broncos and the Jacksonville Jaguars. One more thing. Matt Kajeski and I broke down the whole game, NFL Showdown strategy show. We did that at 9 a.m. So when you're done with this, if you have some time, be sure to check that one out. It's an ugly game. It's an ugly, ugly game,
yes,
but there's still a ton of money to be made. So head over to awesemo.com/join if you want to check out everything we have to offer. Remember, all of our tools, everything on the site, developed, made, created, and used by the #1 ranked DFS player in the world, Alex Baker. You can look it up. It's facts. And we're not making anything up. We're not just slapping his name on it. It's the real deal. These are the tools that he uses to win a ton of money, and that a lot of our users and a lot of our subscribers have won a ton of money with as well. So head over there, check it out. We got some free content from here to there. You can see behind the wall, behind the paywall before you jump in. But awesemo.com/join and go to our Hall of Fame page. You'll see all of the people that have won a ton of money playing with our tools, our projections, our ownership, and our lineup builder, you name it. And be sure to join that premium Slack chat when you do, because if you love talking DFS and sports betting as much as we do, everyone's doing it around the clock. It's a great community over there. I think you'll like it. DJ Moore, 27% ownership. He's going to be very popular. And it's a spot where, Vegas has 51 point implied total here. That is suggesting right now, Matt, and I'll toss this over to you. That is suggesting right now that you are going to see a decent amount of scoring from both teams here. Not a heavy spread whatsoever. And 51 points seems like a lot in this game, but Arizona's going to play at a pretty fast pace under Cliff Kingsbury, and Carolina is probably going to look to get the ball out early and often out of Bridgewater's hands to guys like Mike Davis and then lean on DJ Moore.
That's correct. And from a pace perspective, we saw the Panthers play extremely fast the first 2 weeks of the season and then slow things down in the second half with a big lead against the Chargers. So he threw over 40 times. That's Bridgewater. Threw over 40 times weeks 1 and 2. He was down at 31 in week 3. We can attribute most of that to game script. In regards to DJ Moore, he's annoying me a little bit this season. I'm gonna admit it, because the production just isn't there compared to his massive usage. So he actually ranks 7th overall in true weighted opportunity share. That's the metric, the usage metric I highlight in the Awesemo.com data deep dive. In target share, he's in the top 12. In air yard share, he's in the top 3. He had 58% of the Panthers' air yards last week. And when you compare the production to that, he's wildly underperforming. So in season long, I certainly see him as a buy low candidate. And this week against the Cardinals with that high implied total and a low price at 5,600 on DraftKings, he's one of the most intriguing plays on the slate at the wide receiver position. The Awesemo.com projections are way, way bullish on him compared to almost any other player, having him in the top 5 compared to that 20 wide receiver 25 price tag.
If you're talking about market share of targets as well, it's been a 2-horse race here among the wide receivers in Carolina. It's DJ Moore and it's Robbie Anderson, who has definitely carved out a sizable role for himself in Carolina. Very impressive early on. 25.5% for Moore, 23.5% for Robbie Anderson. And, Robbie Anderson, looking at someone like DJ Moore getting a ton of ownership right now, Robbie Anderson in the same game on the same team is getting 4% at $5,400. Now, let me be clear. One of the biggest reasons for this, Matt, is because if someone looks at DJ Moore at 5,600 and looks at Robbie Anderson at 5,400, they're still going to look towards DJ Moore as the more skilled, talented player with the better pedigree, and everyone knows what they're going to do. But Robbie Anderson has been consistently targeted as the wide receiver 2. In some games, the wide receiver 1. If Teddy Bridgewater is forced to go to the air here, and Anderson is coming in at 22% less ownership than DJ Moore, I'm actually not opposed to getting a little bit different here. I truly don't think it's the craziest idea. He has less air yards than DJ Moore by a decent amount. His ADOT is lower. I understand all of that stuff. But he has a catch rate of 83% this season. He has been able to secure far more of his opportunities than DJ Moore has. And while I'm not sure that's sustainable, it does make him an interesting play at way less ownership in a game with a 50-plus point total.
Yeah, well said. And, there's no doubt about it that Robbie Anderson has moved far ahead of Curtis Samuel in the target and air yard totem pole in this offense. He's been efficient with his opportunities, and it's not like his opportunities have been small. He actually ranks in the top 20 in wide receivers, actually top 15 I'm seeing now, in true target share. And he's in the top 15 as well in total targets. So the volume is actually there, especially if we see the pass totals that we saw in weeks 1 and 2. Again, Vegas is actually predicting this as one of the higher total games. So we could see a great game from both players here.
The only thing I don't like is Teddy Bridgewater, man. He has had a very tough time punching this ball into the end zone. Based on his yardage totals, you would certainly expect more opportunities to score for these players. Hasn't been the case. But let me tell you this might surprise you, Matt. In terms of red zone opportunities for pass catchers, Robbie Anderson has doubled up the next closest receiver. He has 4 red zone targets this season. Curtis Samuel has 2. DJ Moore has 1. Now, granted, Moore's was inside the 5-yard line. All of Robbie Anderson's have been inside the 20, but it's not like it's not like Robbie Anderson is simply being used as the type of receiver he was in New York, where he get a couple opportunities on go routes, maybe a few short intermediate routes, but couldn't really manufacture anything. He's being used everywhere, including the red zone, which is worth keeping an eye on.
Yep. Yeah, and if we can see just a little bit of improvement in the efficiency of Teddy Bridgewater with the amount of passes we see and the pace of play, they could keep pace with a Cliff Kingsbury air raid offense here, that we really don't have any concern over their scoring ability over these first 3 games. So it really is a situation where the Panthers are likely going to be forced into a game situation where they can finally keep pace as scorers. So that's the production we're hoping for with those two players there.
Talk to me about the Arizona Cardinals here. DeAndre Hopkins hadn't practiced, got an ankle injury. I assume that he's going to play until further notice, until we hear anything to the contrary. I think we should all just assume that that's going to be the case. He's been wildly effective in the opportunities that he had. He leads the league in target share at 36%, 238 air yards. It's not at the top of the league. By the way, Calvin Ridley has 559 air yards.
Okay, that's an absurd number.
The next closest player has 200 less than him. That's so crazy. Sorry, I don't mean to get off topic here, but just like those are insane numbers. Nevertheless, DeAndre Hopkins, like I said, maybe not the biggest air yards guy, but he's fourth in the league in yards after the catch. And I love those type of players that can create yards by themselves. He's a human joystick, and he's the type of player that can take the ball 10 yards deep and run for another 50. They're just special players, and there aren't many of them in the league anymore.
Yeah, and one thing that I've noticed this year is that his average depth of target is actually way down in Arizona. And going back and watching the film of that game against the Lions, they're using him in the wide receiver screen game. They're using him very close to the wide receiver line of scrimmage, as well as those deep targets. He's getting a deep target per game already. So exactly, I think the ceiling is actually higher because when you throw passes closer to the line of scrimmage, what do you get? A higher catch rate. So if we get a couple more catches for DeAndre Hopkins, he's number one in true target share. So it's not something we have to be concerned about. Yes, the air yards are Calvin Ridley's game, but he's still sixth overall in true weighted opportunity. So we're in season long, we absolutely we overestimated the concern about the distribution of targets here. It helps because Christian Kirk is missing time. It looks like he's trending towards being back this week, but still, even with a wide receiver 1 price tag on DraftKings, Hopkins is still one of the best plays on the slate in this great environment.
How about Kenyon Drake? People have been very disappointed by him through the first couple of weeks. Through the first few weeks, he hasn't been able to produce the numbers you would expect, especially in some spots with a pretty positive game flow. You know, he's getting shots on the ground, right? 18, 20, and 16 attempts. He's yet to break the 90-yard mark. And I think the biggest concern to many people is while he has a 100% reception rate, he's been targeted only 5 times through 3 games. That is certainly rubbing people the wrong way and has them questioning whether or not this is somebody that is going to be involved in the passing game, or is Chase Edmonds, who's been targeted twice as many times as Kenyon Drake, going to continue to siphon off some of those looks?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Chase Edmonds, and it's clear that the Cardinals are as well. If anything were to ever happen to Kenyon Drake, I think we're going to see a humongous workload for Chase Edmonds. You never root for an injury.
I'd like to see him as a starter somewhere else, to be honest.
It would be really interesting to see, and just the way they use him in the passing game is just it's very exciting. One thing that I looked at this week is high value opportunities at the running back position versus what they call trap opportunities. Those are plays on first or second down, far from the goal line. The expected fantasy points of those rushes are significantly lower than a target or a goal line rush, and Chase Edmonds is well ahead of Kenyon Drake in that category. He actually ranks 32nd among all running backs, while Drake is right around 50th. He's 45th, actually, I'm seeing now. So when we look at quality of opportunity, Chase Edmonds actually is the better back here. And if we look at projection compared to salary, it looks like Edmonds might be the better play. Now, he only has a projection of running back 30, but needing only 12.5 points for 3x value on DraftKings, that's very intriguing to me. You certainly are getting the opportunity overall for Drake. Like you said, the carry numbers are there. And with the high total, you would expect him to get a few extra looks. Maybe an extra touchdown is mixed in there. But at running back 13 on the whole slate, you're definitely going to have to pay for it.
It's a spot that I have no problem getting away from, but if he's well, you know what? Let's wait till we get to this game a little bit later on. There's another running back at a similar price point that's getting immense ownership. Hasn't proven a whole lot yet, but his team's finally favored at home. Maybe it'll be his breakthrough. Until we get there, though, we've got to get through this one first and a couple of others. Washington and Baltimore. Matt, I mentioned the other day on a show that I bet Baltimore as I laid 13 points with Baltimore, and it's a lot of points. I still didn't mind doing it. I think this is an absolute rout. Okay, I'll come back and I'll say I'm dumb. I'll eat my hat, whatever I need to do if I'm wrong on this one. But I just absolutely think coming off a brutal beatdown on primetime Monday Night Football at the hands of the Kansas City Chiefs. By the way, Lamar Jackson's 21-1 against the rest of the league since he started a couple of years ago. 0-3 against Kansas City.
They have his number.
Yeah, they are, and he admitted it.
Yep.
That is not going to be the case with the Washington Redskins. This is still Patrick Mahomes is a different breed. That Baltimore secondary that he carved up is elite. Marlon Humphrey just got paid almost $100 million. That's how good that all-pro corner is. They're good. They're really good. I think they are going to decimate Dwayne Haskins, make life miserable for him. This team is not going to be able to run the ball with Peyton Barber and Antonio Gibson. And outside of Terry McLaurin, who they will be able to slow down, they have no one else. I think this is a blowout win. And I also think that Lamar Jackson is one of the very enticing guys. Now, here's the thing, Matt. He's very expensive. But ownership on Lamar Jackson is less than 2% right now. Less than 2%. Do you know what happens when the Ravens blow teams out? It's because Lamar Jackson's run for 2 touchdowns and he threw for 3, just as he did against Miami in week 1 last year and many others. I get it. He's been disappointing to start the year, but this is the bounce back for Lamar Jackson. I got no problem running some naked Lamar Jackson lineups, pairing him maybe with Mark Andrews in a bounce back spot, maybe Marcus Brown. I don't want to have a ton of them because they're pricey, but I'm looking at Lamar Jackson at 2%, and my jaw drops seeing what he's about to do to this Washington football team.
Yeah, that really doesn't make a lot of sense unless we're seeing sky-high ownership on players like Ingram or Dobbins, I suppose, because they think the game is going to get so out of hand that they're going to mop up in garbage time. But Jackson should absolutely be higher owned than that, even as the highest priced quarterback on the slate. That's exactly right. When they win games by a large margin, it's usually because he was either efficient in the running game, efficient in the passing game, or both. So I don't know why you wouldn't want exposure to their number 1 backfield option in terms of rushing and, of course, their passer. So that absolutely seems like an ownership level that doesn't make sense. One thing that I was looking at in this game in terms of PFF net advantages is that the real large advantages come on the defensive side of the ball for Baltimore. You mentioned it. I really think they're going to be able to bottle up Terry McLaurin, even though he's 12th in true weighted opportunity share among all wide receivers. We know his production is down in the high 30s for wide receivers, and that has a lot to do with Dwayne Haskins, who ranks 34th. Remember, there's only 32 starting quarterbacks each week. 34th in quarterback composite efficiency on my data deep dive. So there's advantages on the rushing side of the ball on defense for Baltimore, and even more in the passing game. I predict that this Washington pass game gets completely shut down, which maybe lead me to some Ravens defense.
I was going to say the same thing, Matt. Yep.
Even though they're the number 1 defense as well. They're
expensive, but this could be one of those spots where, you've got like the Colts last week, 2 defensive touchdowns, and it makes a massive difference.
And one thing I'll add too.
I like the Ravens to steamroll Washington, and if Dwayne Haskins manages to put up points here and keep pace, then I will rethink entirely how I think of Haskins. I'm serious. That is how confident I am that they will have no success moving the football, Matt. Does that make sense? Like, if he can move the football against Baltimore, it's one of 2 things. Because it's a lot harder to get lucky on flukes against really good defenses than it is, maybe against a good pitcher to connect on one, close your eyes, hit a home run, and a couple of other sports. But if this happens, I'm going to assume that either Dwayne Haskins has figured something out or Baltimore has just in 2 weeks become really bad. And the latter just simply isn't in the cards. I don't think the former is either.
Yeah.
So I don't really have anything else on this one. I have no interest in Washington. And I do want to get tournament exposure to Baltimore's passing game and Lamar Jackson. The backfield for me is just so muddled right now. I don't have confidence that it's going to be Ingram or Dobbins or Gus Edwards, and I'd probably just prefer to stay away from it. How about you?
Yeah, exactly. Breaking down the rushing snaps totals, it's really Jackson's backfield because it's spread out between Edwards, who, by the way, has been the most efficient rusher of all of them, and Dobbins and Ingram. It's hard to trust any of them. It's almost like the San Francisco backfield where when they're fully healthy, they're going to be efficient. Someone might break out, but predicting which one is very difficult week to week. And I was going to say, it's such a shame from a usage perspective for talents like Terry McLaurin, and we should add tight end Logan Thomas. If you just looked at the usage stats, sort of like we were saying for Allen Robinson, you would be so excited about these two players, and then the efficiency that they're capable of having. It's just not there. The scoring is not there, and it's just impossible to trust in any format for Terry McLaurin, for Thomas, and it's really the same for the Ravens. For the Ravens backfield, it's just that you said the 2% ownership. I'm still flabbergasted. It makes no sense to me.
It's crazy, man. It's crazy. Maybe the price has something to do with it. Maybe there's just. Well, yeah, that definitely does. But there's probably also concern. Oh, he hasn't looked great through the first however many weeks. That'll be turned around this week.
Well, if you look at things from, you want your lineup to have an 150-point pace, and you want your projections, even your median projections, to at least get you to a 150-point pace. I'm looking at Lamar Jackson's Awesemo.com projection, and it's 2.1 points higher than what you need for an 150-point pace. He's a great option this week, no doubt. For
sure. Last thing I'll say, Dwayne Haskins has thrown 3 times inside the 10-yard line. All 3 of those balls have gone to Logan Thomas. So while he hasn't been able to convert, he is definitely being featured in the red zone when the opportunities present themselves. I just don't see them present. I wouldn't be surprised if they don't get inside the 10-yard line this week.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll eat my words, but I'm willing to die on that hill. If the hill I die on is that Washington is terrible and they end up scoring 30 points, so be it, Matt. Let's talk about Tampa Bay and the LA Chargers. Tampa Bay laying 7.5 points here at home. It appears that Tom Brady and the Bucs have begun to figure things out a little bit. Him and Bruce Arians becoming a little bit more comfortable with each other. They've dropped 31 and 28 points respectively, or against Carolina and Denver respectively. Tom Brady is completing a respectable 65% of his passes. He's thrown 7. I have a bet with Ben Rossa too. I have a pretty hefty bet with Ben Rossa that he throws. I think it's over 23 or 24, 23 and a half touchdowns this year. So I'm hoping he stays healthy and he keeps averaging around 2 per game. We could hit that maybe by week 12 and I'll feel good. But I can't say I'm enamored with Brady this week. It's unfortunate that we've had so many damn injuries to this pass catching core for the Tampa Bay Bucs. Chris Godwin's first 2 games that he's played and he got injured last game really haven't been bad. The yardage isn't exceptional, but he's hauled in 11 of 13 targets, Matt. He found the end zone. He just can't stay healthy. And then Mike Evans has been, his typical self. He's going to have bad games. He's going to have good games. But last week, is this one of the stranger things you've seen? And then I'm just going to throw this over to you. Week 1 reception, 2 yards, 1 touchdown. He was injured, but still. Week 3, 2 receptions, 2 yards, 2 touchdowns. How does that happen?
I really think it has to do with the game flow that Brady wants to play this year. And I actually was writing this up in the data article earlier this week, that they seem so content almost running a Patriot-style efficient offense that leans on the running game to score and just uses the passing game as a way to move the chains. So you are going to see situations where players like Scotty Miller or Justin Watson, if they're healthy, they get a majority of the targets for one game because Brady is exploiting a matchup, he's taking care of business, and they're scoring enough to win games. You're seeing a really low total for this game. I saw it at 45, even though the Buccaneers have a huge implied total compared to the Chargers. And in the efficiency metrics that I look at as well, Brady is not ranking very well. I believe he ranks 24th right now among quarterbacks. Actually, it's lower than that, 29th, and he's 32nd in expected points added per play. So on a per play basis, he's actually been one of the least efficient players. Now, we know that from a drive success rate, he's getting the ball into the end zone enough for them to win, but there's still a lot of meat on the bone, we should say, a lot of room for improvement. It's not going to be easy this week with Godwin trending towards out. It looks like Scott Miller is also going to have trouble, so they're going to be relying on some tight ends in O.J. Howard or Rob Gronkowski, or some options that we weren't even thinking of to start the season, like Justin Watson, or even we could see Tyler Johnson this week. Also, Leonard Fournette looks like he's not going to play this week, which might see Ronald Jones's projection increase, but his ownership will as well in what is expected in a favorable matchup for running backs.
What do you make of the pass catching matchups for Mike Evans here? You know, the Chargers, pretty respectable pass coverage on this team. I think they've at times been a bit shaky, but you look at them against Kansas City, you have to give them credit. They were they I won't say that I wouldn't go as far to say that they stymied Patrick Mahomes. I think he played one of his lesser impressive games. And if you looked at him in the fourth quarter in overtime, he drove the ball downfield with relative ease because that's what he does. But, you know, assuming that Chris Godwin doesn't end up playing, did not practice or is not practicing today, we have that news already. Mike Evans, I can only imagine, sees, you know, a higher share of targets. The one game that Godwin missed in week 2, Evans was targeted 10 times, and they won that game by 2 touchdowns.
Yeah, I think he makes a ton of sense. You're going to see ownership shift that way if Godwin misses, as it looks like he is. But one thing I was looking at in the PFF net advantage grades is that they grade out much better in the running game, that is the Buccaneers do, versus the Chargers than the passing game. Now, I might be mistaken about this, but didn't Chris Harris also get injured for the Chargers defense this weekend?
Yep, Chris Harris is out, I believe.
That's a big loss for them. Now, they still have Hayward, and they do have a competent defense. We said this last week. We're never going to see what the Chargers defense could be at full strength. Oh, so that's an incredibly large loss for a passing game. Now, with just one option in the passing game, they might be able to shift their concern to Evans entirely and force Brady to beat them with someone else. We've certainly seen that tactic used on Brady before. Again, I'm seeing a massive running game advantage and a running block advantage from the PFF net grades here, which again, especially if Fournette's out, leads me to Ronald Jones.
Listen, Ronald Jones is one of those players that can win tournaments for you because no one ever wants to play the guy. His price is deflated after what we saw with Leonard Fournette in week 2. Mind you, Ronald Jones was having a strong game until he fumbled, Matt.
Right.
Did he lose that? I swear, you know, it's showing that he didn't fumble. Why did I swear I saw Ronald Jones fumble in week 2.
It may have been called back by a penalty or something like that, but he absolutely fumbled, and he absolutely got put in the proverbial doghouse.
Right? Okay, I'm not crazy here.
No, you're not.
Okay, because I bet him first to score a touchdown, but I also had a lot of Ronald Jones in DFS. So he gets that touchdown. I'm like, all right, here we go. We're in business now. And then after he put that ball in the ground, he kind of disappeared. That makes more sense. I swear he fumbled and lost it, but maybe you're right. Maybe they returned it, or maybe they called it back. But Bruce Arians definitely, as you said, put him in the proverbial doghouse. 13 carries last week. Denver run defense, they're okay. They're great. They're going to grade middle of the league, so it is what it is there. But if Leonard Fournette does happen to sit, LaShawn McCoy certainly isn't going to siphon off a bunch of carries here in the backfield. Fournette, non-participant in Thursday's practice dealing with that ankle injury. You could be right about this. Ronald Jones at that price could end up being strong. Plus, they're 7.5-point favorites, which clearly feels like they could dictate this game on the ground.
Yeah, then that's really where I'm looking right now. I'm not trusting Mike Evans the way that this offense is running, and so I'm probably staying away from this, assuming Godwin is out. On the other side of the ball, I really like that Keenan Allen has once again emerged as this number 1 target. So assuming that the Chargers are in this catch-up situation, I definitely may be looking to Keenan Allen as a usage hog and just to play the volume there, even in this low game total.
Keenan Allen, to me, is someone that, 1, is a PPR monster. 2, you really need to rely on the targets and the receptions for him to get there. Because generally speaking, he's the type of guy that'll give you 10 to 13 targets, and he hauls them in at a very high clip. Not a ridiculous. What's his ADOT this year? Do you know off the top of your head?
I don't have his average depth of target, but what I was going to add is that his true air yard share, his share of the Chargers' overall air yards, is actually 8th overall in the league. So
that's really impressive.
He's being used as a we usually call the alpha wide receiver. So he's being used downfield more. His touchdown was past 16 yards, I believe, last week in the fourth quarter in their ferocious comeback. He's ranked number 1 in true weighted opportunity share. So including air yards into the mix, he's up there with the elites, the Hopkins of the world. He isn't treated like that, and that's why his wide receiver 11 price tag, it seems kind of right this week compared to his projection, especially on Awesemo.com.
332 air yards this season. And granted, they're not the end all and be all. Point being is that Keenan Allen is the type of guy that can really provide you a ton of security as well. Wow, 342 air yards. That ranks 7th. And like you said, the target share or the market share of air yards, would you say 8th in the entire league? So
yeah, he's
crazy.
At an elite level in targets. Well, he's 2nd there in true target share. So
here we go. Jeff Williams. Thanks, Jeff. In our premium Slack chat says, Lavi, they credited the fumble to Brady, even though it was Jones' fault. Technically, he never has possession. Good call there, Jeff. And by the way, they need more discretion about that. I've seen quarterbacks get credited with fumbles that had nothing to do with them just because the running back can't handle a handoff. But Keenan Allen for me on this side stands out. He's still underpriced too. Like if he's gonna, I think we both noticed. Justin Herbert is surely leaning on him as a young quarterback, knowing that he can put the ball within a somewhat respectable catch rate or a somewhat respectable distance of Keenan Allen, and he has the catch radius to bring it in. That's encouraging if you're a young quarterback because you're going to keep peppering him. What are you doing? We'll move on after this with the running backs for the LA Chargers.
Yeah, I'm still very respectful of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers run defense. We know that Todd Bowles really, really values stopping the run as a part of his the defensive identity. Looking at the price tag of Austin Eckler, because of that great game, he's priced at running back 5 right now. Certainly the Awesemo.com projections are very bearish on Eckler compared to that. So there might be some pivots to Joshua Kelly, but even he's priced up to running back 24. That's pretty pricey. So he's 5,100. You're not getting a huge savings there as a secondary running back in what should be a poor game script for, especially for running backs coming from behind.
We've seen a very interesting usage of Austin Eckler based on how the game is moving. And if you're assuming that this game is going to play where Tampa Bay takes the lead and the Chargers are forced to play from behind, then Austin Eckler becomes a little bit more intriguing. 1 target against the Cincinnati Bengals in a game that was competitive throughout, never a wide lead. 4 targets against the Kansas City Chiefs. Again, a game that went to overtime. 11 targets last week in a game where they were playing from behind since the very beginning. So if you're trying to get a feel for how this one's going to play, consider keeping that in mind. Another thing, too, the biggest disparity in snap counts from weeks 1 through week 3 with Eckler and Joshua Kelly. Eckler playing from behind, 72% of snaps. Joshua Kelly, only 29%. That in contrast to week 2, where it was 57 and 52%. All right. Sorry, what's that?
I was just going to say that makes a ton of sense. You're going to see Eckler more in the passing game. I will say, though, that regardless of how far behind, they're using Joshua Kelly consistently at the goal line, which means that there's some touchdown equity there that you could grab onto.
All right. Seattle, Miami. I'm a big Fitzpatrick guy. I love the guy. His team loves him. They all love him, Matt. He's a stud. Well, sometimes he's a stud. And guess what? When he is a stud, he's going to win you tournaments. When he's not, his defense he's facing is going to win you tournaments. That's how it works. But, I mean, who doesn't love Ryan Fitzmagic? You're crazy and you're soulless if you don't like this man. I don't even care if you're a Jets or a Dolphins fan. Well, if you're a Jets fan still at this stage of the game, you're soulless to begin with. But
that's right.
The look, I'm an Eagles fan. I feel for you guys. Don't take it personally. Miami Dolphins, 6.5 point dogs at home. 54 point total, though. How about that? Seattle's defense has faced some good teams. I want to let you run with this, Matt, because I don't want to go too long today. But Seattle's defense, through the first 3 weeks, they faced Dak Prescott last week. Then they had Cam Newton, who clearly looks great, and Matt Ryan. 461 passing yards, 397 passing yards, 434 passing yards allowed. That is preposterous that any team facing any quarterbacks through 3 weeks is averaging 430 passing yards allowed per game. So simply put, while they could make life tough for Ryan Fitzpatrick, they still don't have a good pass rush. Russell Wilson is carrying them to wins because they can't get to opposing quarterbacks. A clean pocket for Ryan Fitzpatrick could result in a pretty decent game for him, for Devontae Parker and Mike Gesicki. So I'll leave you with this, Matt. Ownership right now on the Miami Dolphins as 6.5 point dogs in a game with a 54 point total. At awesemo.com, where you can check our ownership out. Ryan Fitzpatrick is at 5%. Devontae Parker is getting 10%. Gesicki's getting 3.5%. Floor is yours. What are you doing with this game? Tackle both sides.
Sure. So first of all, I want to say that the Russ is cooking debate is over. He's cooking. It's happening. So what I want to say by that is I was looking at some of the metrics for my data deep dive, and the Seahawks weren't really popping as an aggressive team because their pace of play is actually slow, and their pass rate on first and second down in neutral situations isn't that great. But
Russell Wilson just can't miss throws.
That's exactly. He's throwing deep consistently and not missing his throws. So when you incorporate air yards into pace of play by doing a stat like air yards per second of play, he is up there with the most aggressive teams in the league, along with the Steelers and the Bengals, who are essentially just letting Joe Burrow air it out every game. So that's why you're seeing these massive point totals for the Seahawks, because he's been efficient on the deep ball. It's sort of like when Steph Curry started taking more threes and he was just as efficient as always, the points just went up. Yep. So that's exactly what we're seeing with the Seahawks right now. He's number one in my composite efficiency metric that I look at in the data deep dive. He's turning drives into scores. That's touchdowns at the second highest rate in the league. He's second in expected points added per play. And when you have efficiency like that and two receivers who are taking up more than 50% of the air yards and targets in Lockett and Metcalf, it's just an ideal situation for fantasy football. It's going to have high ownership with it. If you're looking at median projections, it might actually be a little bit scary. Both Metcalf and Lockett are priced above what their projection is. But when you think about ceiling, when you think about the ability for that to put up slate-breaking scores, we're talking about Lockett and Metcalf as two of the highest probability receivers in the entire slate, simply because of how good Russell Wilson has played. That also brings Chris Carson into the mix, because at running back 11, he's not incredibly pricey. His projection lines up just there as well. And if they're going to be scoring that many touchdowns as we expect, then Carson could easily plunge in for 2. Now, we're not 100% sure he's playing, but he did practice earlier this week, which is a great sign for his availability on Sunday. There's no question that I'm going to be taking Seahawks stacks until further notice, especially against a Dolphins defense who I don't really respect as one of the top tiered teams in any defensive unit. So looks like I'm having, I don't know if people can hear me right now. You can hear me? Cool. Okay, cool. We're back on it. Awesome. So in case I was unable to be heard, I'm trusting the Seahawks that you trust. Okay, cool. And then the Dolphins here, what I'm also looking at is Ryan Fitzpatrick is spreading the ball out to many of his receivers after Mike Gesicki. So I'm really leaning on Gesicki, even if he has high ownership and high salary here. He's salaried up at tight end 6 on the week. So he's going to need a big game for you. But again, in this game environment against the Seahawks, I think the probability of it happening is quite high. Same with Devontae Parker. I think his projection compared to his salary of wide receiver 23 looks really, really solid. And again, we're not talking about one of the worst offensive teams in the league. We're talking about a middle-of-the-road efficiency team and a middle-of-the-road efficiency quarterback. So I'm seeing quarterback 14 in terms of composite efficiency. That's not terrible, and it is enough to take a few bets on these Dolphins receivers as productive options this week. Not touching the running game here. Myles Gaskin, though, he seems to have taken over control of this backfield. And at running back 25 in salary, he might present some value. I think it's a stay away situation for me.
Yeah, not huge on that. His snap count continues to rise. Jordan Howard's been relegated to, and this is the unfortunate part, a goal line role. I believe Jordan Howard had 2 opportunities inside the red zone last week. That sucks, right? At the goal line, I believe he had 2 at the goal line. One of them he punched in, the other he didn't. He might have even had 3. That's not what I want to see. Gaskin's been okay. He's slippery, right? He's slippery. He can hit holes, but against good defensive fronts, he's going to struggle. I'm getting away from that as well. If Gaskin was still in the 4K range, I'd be willing to have a different conversation. But I just think this game is going to be an aerial assault on both sides. My assumption is Seattle is going to get ahead. Well, not even get ahead early, but they're going to be able to score. And Miami on the opposite side is going to have to do what they can to answer. I wish Ryan Fitzpatrick wasn't providing these pass catchers with such flat target shares. You know, Gesicki's leading the team, but he's at 19%, 19.8%. Parker at 18%. Preston Williams at 15%. But I will say this much. I think even Isaiah Ford.
Yep. I was
right. Even Isaiah
well.
Ford. Yeah. I'll say this much though. Gesicki, Parker, and Williams are all 10 plus ADOT players this season. There's upside in rostering these guys. And I think that's at least going to make things pretty attractive from a game stacking standpoint. Devontae Parker, yes, he's getting ownership. But I'll tell you what, Matt, I really think the lack of a pass rush for Seattle is going to make them one of the best teams to target all season long, because you could target Metcalf, you could target Lockett, you could target Wilson, but they're going to give up points. And Vegas has clearly adjusted pretty quickly to that. And you can see from Miami alone getting a pretty respectable implied total for a Dolphins team that never gets above 20.
We should be consistent here and say that if the Dolphins are on the type of game script that we assume, though, that Myles Gaskin actually might be a decent option in the vein similar to Austin Eckler. He actually ranks 5th in quality opportunities at the running back position. And that's an indicator that the Dolphins have been playing from behind a bit. So he's getting those targets. And even though if the goal line usage belongs to Jordan Howard, we could see some extra targets in a catch-up environment in the second half.
Yep, and I think really just the big question here comes into at his price range, are there better options to Gaskin? And we can talk about a couple of them. Let's hit on Jacksonville and Cincinnati first. Before we do, if you guys are into NBA, you're loving DFS showdown slates, I think our boy Rimpak, that you'll see do some NBA shows around here, uses our ownership projections, uses the Awesemo projections. Very good player, just cashed in the 100,000+ yesterday on FanDuel on the NBA showdown slate. We've seen so many huge winners at Awesemo using these projections and ownership. If you use the promo code Orlando, like Orlando, Florida, you'll get the weekly Awesemo Plus NBA showdown package for only $5. It's $10 off, $5, everything you need over the next week to get in all of that NBA Finals action you need. Probably going to be a sweep, so you're going to get $5. No, I'm just kidding. I think it'll go 5 games, but it'll probably you'll essentially get everything you need for $5. Let me see. Let me make sure that this is just a weekly, or is it the rest of the season? Because that would be even better.
As you're checking, so brutal for the Heat. Just so tough. Dragic,
Adebayo, he seems to be okay.
Yeah.
I think LeBron James is just still the best player in the world, and I wasn't willing to admit that, but The guy is in. I don't know.
Yeah. What else can you say? Yeah,
It's crazy. Use that promo code Orlando. $5 for the Awesemo Plus weekly NBA pass for the NBA Finals. So I'm assuming you just get it all for the final. $5. Yeah. Why not? Showdown slate, single game, all of the projections, ownership, all that great stuff for $5. There's no reason not to. All right, Jacksonville, Cincinnati. Joe Burrow to me is actually pretty intriguing this week. The ownership, the super low ownership on him, likely because his prices come up a little bit, is driving his ownership down through the floor. Only a 44.5 point total. Understandable. I'm not a believer in Gardner Minshew, and I think both of these teams are probably going to struggle oftentimes to move the football. But what I saw Ryan Fitzpatrick do last week against this Jacksonville defense goes to show you that there are some real holes here. And the team that we projected them to be before the season started, I believe they're actually closer to that than the team that we saw over the first 2 weeks. That's just one man's opinion. But Joe Burrow, no ownership right now. He's got some quality pass catchers, specifically Tyler Boyd. I might have to be out on AJ Green. But I'm just talking from an ownership standpoint. These guys are not popular at all. Burrow, Boyd, both of them below 3% coming into this week. And Tyler Boyd's been very effective over the last 2 weeks and it seems like he's rapidly becoming Joe Burrow's favorite option.
Yeah, and I really hate to say it because I've been such a fan of AJ Green's for so long.
It hurts me, Matt.
And we've seen this happen before. One player that it comes to mind with is Andre Johnson, just peppered with targets into his mid-30s, and then I believe at the age 33 season, we just saw it completely fall off.
Collapse.
And so that brings me to Tyler Boyd, since I too am a little concerned about AJ Green, trusting him really in lineups at all right now. He's still priced at wide receiver 26. Tyler Boyd's really interesting. As I was talking about with our last game, the Bengals, in terms of air yards per second, are one of the strongest teams that we want to target in terms of deep passes and fast pace of play. They're right there at the top for both metrics, and what that's led to is Tyler Boyd. He's now 9th in quality opportunities. That's targets or rushes if a wide receiver is to get one near the goal line. That's a great amount of volume, especially for a player that we can get with a wide receiver 17 salary on DraftKings still. He's going to need a great game. He's going to need about 18 points for a 3x salary. But with Burrow passing the ball the amount that he has been, and an implied total north of 25, it's certainly not out of the question. Burrow has been extremely efficient, especially when you consider the fact that he's a rookie. He's about 25th in my QB composite efficiency grade, the most pass attempts in the league, as I mentioned. So even if there's going to be situations where he turns the ball over, his receivers are going to have a lot of chance to produce, even if the game script gets out of hand, which actually this case, it doesn't look like it's going to, but we never know.
Yeah, right. We like to talk about projected game scripts, but we know very well that things could go way differently than we're projecting.
Exactly.
Which is why it's crazy to just sometimes say, well, I hate the running back in this game because I think that it's going to go this way, so I can't play him, even though it's a pretty decent matchup. You have to be very careful about that. We talked about it on the Monday morning quarterback show, Josh Engelman, Adam Scher, and myself. I'd really recommend you guys check that out and hang out with us every Monday too, because we're not just breaking down the previous week. We're looking at what happened. We're talking strategy, lessons to be learned for upcoming weeks, and how to really approach the game outside of just a player evaluation standpoint. It makes a huge difference when you can look at the game through a different lens and being able to find some to blend the two together, player evaluation, team evaluation, but also strategy perspective. Having some combination of those two can be really effective. So come join us every single week, every Monday at 11 a.m. What's the 26-point implied total for the Bengals is pretty solid. I have no problem getting the Burrow here, and I'm not too worried. I actually like Mixon a little bit too, because his ownership is way lower than so many of these other players that are in similar spots to him at a similar price point, but that line has had a very tough time blocking for him, Matt.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, I'm looking at the Awesemo.com projections for the Jaguars, and they're considered one of the best value plays on the slate here. They're priced down at the 13th highest DST, and they're ranked 7th according to our projections here. And that's really betting on a Joe Burrow mistake or two, and that defensive line getting past the Bengals offensive line, which hasn't been anything to write home about. I don't see a lot of alternative game scripts, as in like this game really shooting out or hitting the over, which kind of makes me pause about any of the wide receiver options or Gardner Minshew, who is perfectly content throwing under 25 passes a game. That means opportunity overall for James Robinson is going to be pretty high. But again, looking at that high value opportunity ranking, he's only 24th among running backs in that quality opportunity ranking, and he's priced up at running back 9. I think that's really steep. He's going to need about 20 points for a 3x game on DraftKings. That's tough to see for me. Again, we just talked about it. We could see the game going different ways, but for this one, hitting the mid-50s just seems really unlikely, so I'm probably staying away from the Jaguars overall.
So am I. Well, I don't know if I'm staying away from them overall. I'm not a believer in this Cincinnati defense. They made life very difficult for Carson Wentz because Jason Peters is really old and he couldn't protect Carson Wentz's blind side. Aside from that, though, Carson Wentz just missed wide open passes. And I don't mean to go back to this, but just looking at that last game, I refuse to give credit to the Bengals. I wouldn't say they're the worst in the league, but I honestly wouldn't be surprised if this game shot out. So I have a slightly different opinion here. If I am going to look towards the Bengals, I might end up going with a single stack with Burrow and Tyler Boyd, say, and then maybe running it back with somebody from this Jacksonville side. I don't know if DJ Shark is going to be active. If he is, this is a spot at 6K that I'm not afraid to get to. Robinson's a little bit different. You know, that touchdown equity is a little bit. He's had 3 touchdowns over the last 2 games. I don't know how often on this team you're going to see that type of opportunity, but no, I actually don't mind running it back with a Shark. Robinson's a little bit expensive, but I think I could probably get there. If I'm crunching lineups, I think that I'll probably end up just by default running it back with a little bit of one of those guys.
Sure, that makes sense.
Cleveland and Dallas. All right, so I'm probably rostering some Baker Mayfield, and it's probably going to end terribly bad for me, Matt. But this game just keeps seeing the total increase. It keeps seeing, what is it, 56 now, I think?
50, oh, wow.
56.
Yep, that's higher than I have written. Here we go.
Yeah, it's at 56. And while everyone's looking at Dallas, which I absolutely think you should be, they've got a 30.8 implied total. What about the fact that the Browns still have a 26-point implied total here? The big question is, will they run the ball? Will they be able to run the ball given their secondary issues? Is Greedy Williams back?
I don't know, actually.
Neither do I. But either way.
Yeah, their secondary still has had problems stopping people especially in 2 of the matchups there this
exactly.
Season.
There's just a lot of opportunity in this game. And it's not like it's a 55-point total where the Cowboys are 13-point favorites and they're getting all of the expected scoring. This is on both sides. Both teams expected to be able to move the football.
Yeah, and from an identity standpoint, we still know that Cleveland wants to be a running first team adopted from that Minnesota Vikings 2019 identity with Dalvin Cook. Now they just are trying to run it down your throat with Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt any chance they get. And even if they get down a little bit, they don't really change their identity all that much. They are middle of the road in both of the air yards per second metrics that I look at and the early down passing metrics. They're actually 25th percentile in true early down pass rate. So they're quite run heavy as we would expect. One encouraging sign is Odell Beckham getting usage back up towards an elite level. I saw that his true target share is 8th among wide receivers now, and his true air yard share is 6th among wide receivers. That's leading to an 8th overall true weighted opportunity share. Basically, he's being used like the number 1 wide receiver that we thought he was going to be when he went there last year. That's very encouraging, especially against a Cowboys defense who has struggled to stop everybody so far. I'm sure there are going to be a ton of players going back to the well this week after Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf hit pay dirt at their price. Would have been an even bigger game for DK Metcalf if he kept his head on straight the whole game. And so I'm definitely going to be looking at Beckham and Mayfield and then running it back with a bunch of Cowboys or vice versa.
It's funny with Odell Beckham, right? You look at him and you assume that there's not much going on and that Baker Mayfield's just not really looking his way. He has a 27% target share or market share of targets. It's not that when they pass the ball, he's not getting. That's not what's happening. It's just they can run the football as much as they want, and that kind of sucks, right? So let me see. Where does he rank in dropbacks? Baker Mayfield's got to be towards the bottom of the league in dropbacks. Maybe not because of that game against Baltimore. Yeah, look at this, 28. He's only dropped back 92 times in 3 games. Like that's concerning that the pass volume might not be there.
Just won't be there. Yeah.
Right. But I guess, let me ask you this, Matt. Will the pass volume, let me just filter this by week 1, right? Will the pass volume be there if we see a similar situation and Dallas goes up early? Because Baker Mayfield dropped back 42 times in week 1, which is way more than he has in weeks 2 and week 3. There is an argument that happens, but the game's only separated by 4.5 points. They might look to run the ball a lot, and that's the one concern. Yes, Odell Beckham, 27% market share of targets. If I told you he'd have that before the season, you'd feel pretty good about it, but not if you looked at the pass volume and the amount of times or the lack of times that Baker Mayfield's dropping back.
Yeah, they may not have that choice this week, however, because we know how Dallas prefers to play up-tempo.
This is what I'm hoping for as well, yeah.
Yeah, and and if you're attacking this game in DFS, that's certainly what you're hoping for, the super high game total. But also, if we get a situation where Dallas scores first, I think that's where you start to see the large passing totals for Cleveland. If they get up, Dallas does by 10 or so points, maybe more, then Cleveland will be forced by situation to move the ball in different ways. Really, I don't see them changing their identity until that 10 to 14 point deficit. So from a DFS perspective, that's really what you're hoping for. Looking at the Awesemo projections, though, it does look like Beckham's projection compared to Price looks really rosy, and Jarvis Landry is right in line. I'm not sure I'm willing, unless I'm doing a large tournament entry, to go Austin Hooper. The usage just really hasn't been there. But we definitely need to talk about these secondary options on the Cowboys because they had huge games, and I don't see any reason why Dalton Schultz and Cedric Wilson can't have more big games in the future as well.
Okay. It is such a strange team. I mean, we came into this thinking that we had a pretty good idea of where all the targets would be going, right? Like, that maybe Cedric Wilson wouldn't be the guy. Last week, well, I think we were surprised. All of us. He had 7 targets, his only 7 looks of the season. Amari was targeted 12 times, CeeDee Lamb 6 times, Michael Gallup 9 times, Cedric Wilson 7 times, Dalton Schultz 6 times, Ezekiel Elliott 12 times. Matt, it's so nuts to see the amount of passes. Dak Prescott's arm is going to fall off soon. 57 pass attempts. Got picked off twice, but we'll take the 3 scores. Ezekiel Elliott, though, the one thing I love about what I'm seeing from him, the involvement in the passing game is so encouraging. My God, horrible game efficiency-wise on the ground.
He couldn't do
against
anything.
Seattle. And this isn't the type of game you're looking for. 18 fantasy points isn't going to cut it. But the fact that they played from behind and he had 12 targets and has been looked at 19 times in the passing game over the last 2 weeks makes me feel like he is always going to be game script proof. That's something we can hang our hats on.
Yep, absolutely. And yeah, to just put a stat to what you were saying about the distribution of targets, we definitely thought that Lamb, Gallup, and Cooper would put themselves right in the top 10 in terms of consolidated weighted opportunity. That's just combining air yard share and target share. But in reality, they're actually in the bottom 13 of the league. That means you're seeing added targets for the tight ends. That's Dalton Schultz. For Cedric Wilson, who he was incredibly efficient and productive on his targets. And you know what it actually reminded me of? It reminded me of the LA Rams situation prior to Brandon Cooks leaving the team, where they had a rotation of 3 receivers, but then they used Josh Reynolds as essentially a replacement for any of the 3. So when CeeDee Lamb got hurt on a punt return in the second half and he had to miss snaps, Wilson came in. Same thing. Cooper makes a diving catch. He gets hurt. Wilson comes in. You're seeing added snap shares for him, and they certainly don't mind targeting him at a super low price range, even for this week. I think Cedric Wilson at wide receiver 90, you could do much worse.
Hit that thumbs up if you haven't done so. Let's get this over 100. We got almost 400 people watching. If you're in YouTube chat on your iPhone or your Droid, all you got to do is click out of chat, right? And then you'll see that. Then you go right back in the chat. No harm, no foul. Appreciate you. Subscribe, too. Hit the notification bell so you always know when new content's dropping next. Talking Houston and the Minnesota Vikings. A battle between bad teams here, Matt. But Houston looking like we could see a little bit of a resurgence, a bounce back for Deshaun Watson, maybe Will Fuller, maybe Brandon Cooks. But the big question mark here is, what are we doing with David Johnson, second highest projected ownership of any player right now? He's been on the field for 90+% of the offensive snaps in back-to-back games, certainly playing from behind a few times this season. But Minnesota, man, defensively, it's rough. They lost Anthony Barr now to the IR. They already had a ton of difficulties, a lot of turnover, bad run defense, bad pass coverage. I think Pro Football Focus has them 31st in run defense this season, which just should surprise absolutely nobody. David Johnson's ownership, though, is extraordinarily high because his price is very low. Are you in on it?
Not specifically with David Johnson. I completely
I'm
understand.
talking just Johnson. We'll get to the passing game in a minute, but let's tackle this since it's such
not specifically with David Johnson. Right. Duke Johnson is trending towards playing. I guess it changes for me a little bit if we know the backfield is essentially all his in what should be a positive game script. Like you said, another week goes by. Are we still targeting the Vikings defense? Yes, we are. We're targeting them every week. So the environment should be right for a running back to smash. And you know what? The price is right as well. At running back 19, that is really the big indicator here that there's a low expectation of success. And we know the ceiling is significantly higher. So he has to be considered at 5,600 on DraftKings. I just don't know if I'm willing to risk it, especially if Duke Johnson plays this week.
I honestly might just come in around the field on David. I don't know if I'm going to, but I'm honestly tempted to just make sure I don't get killed by it, because here's my concern. Here's what's weighing in the back of my head, Matt. I watched David Johnson in week 1 against the Kansas City Chiefs before that game got out of control. He actually looked really good in the limited opportunities. Just talking about the eye test for a moment here, right? The jump cuts were quick. Change of direction was quick. Balance was like everything about him looked really good. He had that nice touchdown run for 19 yards. I really liked what I saw. And then you go against Baltimore. He has no opportunity at all. How can I judge him off of that game? And then Pittsburgh, he really struggled to run. But the Steelers' run defense is the equivalent of a brick wall. Like they might not allow a 100 rushing yard game all season long. If they have already, please forgive me. But ultimately, this is one of those spots where David Johnson is poised to break out. It's just everyone else is on him. And let me finish with this, and then you can wrap up the Houston Astros. Oh my God, did you hear that? Dude, do you know how tough it is doing 3 sports at once, Matt? It sucks. Yeah. Wow. All right, you can wrap up the Houston Oilers and the Minnesota. I'm kidding, and the Minnesota Vikings after this. But the one thing to always consider if you're talking about leverage and you're talking about tournaments, David Johnson could be in a really good spot, poised to have a really good game. Never forget, though, to look at players that are priced around him, players that are priced in that same tier as him, that might be in equally good spots or might not be in quite as good of a spot, but might have half or a fraction of the ownership. And Miles Sanders last week is a good example of a really good play that doesn't pan out. Carson Wentz missed him on a deep throw on a wheel route down the sideline, would have been a 40, 50-yard touchdown. Doug Peterson decided to stop going to him. Would have been a 100-yard game with the bonus. It didn't happen, and he finishes with 12 or 13 fantasy points. Don't think that can't happen to David Johnson. So always keep that in mind when you're deciding maybe in a single entry or 3 max in a large field, whether or not it's worth it, whether or not you have to play a guy. No one's ever a lock, even though they're a really good play. Go ahead.
That's well said. And, one thing, we talk about trying to improve our process on a show like this, and that involves moving away from the projection, knowing that the range of outcomes is much higher than just one number and one decimal place. And just because someone is higher in the projections or in salary does not necessarily indicate them as a better play. And especially when we talk about game environments, sometimes players can have a lower projection, but a higher probability of hitting their ceiling. And those are exact opportunities we can exploit. With David Johnson, we see a ceiling opportunity here. And at a price of running back 19, as I mentioned before, we get the opportunity for him to underachieve a little bit and still be somewhat of value. Just to put stats to your eye test from earlier about Johnson, we also see him breaking tackles at an above average rate based on historical trend lines, based on the number of touches he had. And like you said, he's faced some really tough defenses and game scripts as well. So there's a lot to like here. I certainly like it a lot more, again, if Duke is out one more time.
What are your thoughts on Watson in the passing game?
So that's really what I'm excited about. So one of the indicators for shootouts that I look at is just looking at the team passing grades from both teams and seeing if the passing grades on PFF are both above average for both teams. And then ignoring defense for just a moment, we see that the Vikings and the Texans have great passing grades on PFF. And then if you look in terms of net advantage versus their opposing defenses, they both actually have 2 of the top 6 net advantages in the passing game on the week. So what does that mean? It means that they might actually have the most success, both sides of the ball, passing, which could lead to a lot of points here and a sneaky shootout as well. Well, not sneaky at 53.5, but with the totals we have this week, there might be lower ownership than we expect for such a high total. I really have trouble in general trusting Will Fuller, but he really has had a productive 2 weeks other than that week 2 where he left. His wide receiver 20 price tag is still a little bit high on DraftKings. I'm looking at Brandon Cooks, who at wide receiver 46 on DraftKings, that's 4,500. He needs about 13.5 points to really hit pay dirt for you in your lineup. And even if you just look at median projection and the possible game flow for this game, I think he comes in really, really strong. So that's the first place I'll look if I'm stacking with Deshaun Watson. And then, of course, if you're running it back, the obvious choice is Adam Thielen. Still so much of the opportunity share there. I believe he's down to 3rd in true weighted opportunity share. He was up there at number 1, but still there's so much to like there. The tight ends are not involved in the passing game, and we're still seeing Justin Jefferson and Olabisi Johnson sorted out below Thielen. So I'm still really trusting Thielen as a run back option in what should be a great game script.
I am too. I don't really have much to add to that either. Outside of the fact that over the last 2 games, since Brandon Cooks has seen an uptick in snaps, because week 1, remember, he was limited. We knew that. He's ran 71 routes to Will Fuller's 59. This, of course, isn't to say that Will Fuller isn't in play. Will Fuller's still the better receiver. But I was very high on Fuller and Cooks coming into the year. I'm still going to hold out hope for them once their schedule gets a bit easier. It's only fair, Matt, that we have to we have to look at their production relative to who they've faced as well.
Absolutely.
And they've had some very tough matchups. And, Kansas City's defense also looks pretty damn good. So I'm going to take a step back and wait until they start to see a bit easier path in the schedule. It starts this week. It's going to tell me a lot. Can they produce in a spot like this? I think they can. But I'm 100% with you on Brandon Cooks. He's been out there a ton. And very simply, Brandon Cooks is the type of receiver that can break off some really big plays and win tournaments for you at 4,500. Both of these guys in play for me. Adam Thielen as the run back, agree with that. Very quickly, because I want to get through this. I want to come in under 2 hours. Any interest in Dalvin Cook?
Yeah, I actually do have interest in Dalvin Cook. When we talk about team identities, the Vikings, even if the game total is high, even if it looks like they're going to have advantages in the passing game, we know that their identity is a running team, that's what they prefer to do in the Gary Kubiak offense in general. So while it does look like a really positive game script for the passing game, Dalvin Cook has the necessary usage and the ceiling, as we talked about before, to be a game-breaking player on the slate. You're going to have to pay up at running back 4 overall, but the Awesemo.com projections are right in line with that. So I'm completely fine playing him, especially if his ownership comes in a little bit lower and some of the players with his similar usage.
Cooks or Cobb, Steve asks. Definitely Cooks, man. Definitely Cooks.
Yeah, from a usage standpoint, Cooks over that. But I will say that it has been encouraging for Cobb over the last few weeks. He got into the end zone last week, if I'm not mistaken here.
He did, yep.
And I'm looking here. He's actually up to, he's still wide receiver 79 in terms of true weighted opportunity share. That's the usage metric I look at. That's not really somebody we're going to be counting on all that much.
Yeah, give me the big playability with Brandon Cooks. Hoping that they start to stretch the field with him a little bit more. You ready to move on? Got a couple more to go.
Let's roll.
All right, let's do it. By the way, Cooks leads the team in target share. Did not know that. It's pretty flat, but he's at 20%. Interesting.
Yeah, when you remove the game 2 goose egg from Fuller, as I have to try to contextualize things, it looks like when they're on the field, Fuller is the more targeted asset. But yeah, I'm perfectly happy looking at the 32nd overall wide receiver in true target share on my lineups this week.
Rams, New York Giants. Here we go. New York Giants getting 13 points here, 48.5 point total. Now, this is one where the implied totals for each team are very much skewed, as they should be. 17.75 for the Giants, 30.75 for the Rams. I'm going to ask you this, Matt, before we get to the Rams, because I want to be able to get through certain things that aren't going to take a ton of time. Is there anyone from the Giants that you're interested in?
No, not really. Darius Slayton is projected right at salary. Same with Devonta Freeman. Golden Tate, maybe a little bit of value, but they're a tournament run back option when you're trying to stack the Rams is really what we're probably using this team for only this week.
Okay. What about the Rams with that 30+ point implied total against the Giants team that's just been dreadful?
Now here's where it gets much more interesting for this game. When we look at the aggressiveness stats for a team like the Rams, they actually look like one of the most conservative offenses in the league. They're running the ball at a really, really high rate. They're passing at an incredibly low ADOT. I believe Goff is still at the bottom of the league in average depth of target, but they're incredibly efficient on that work. So they actually profile similar to a team like the Chargers in terms of their pass usage and when they pass, but they're way, way more efficient. They're actually in the top 5 of overall efficiency, and Goff himself is playing as a top 10 quarterback in terms of my composite efficiency metric. That said, with such a high implied total compared to their opponent, we would be silly not to talk about the running backs. Darrell Henderson looked fantastic in his first full usage week in week 3. He definitely looked like the best back. Cam Akers still isn't practicing, so maybe we'll look a little to Malcolm Brown, but I think Darrell Henderson presents a really intriguing option at running back 15. He's priced up, but I certainly don't hate it this week.
All right. So with Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods, Tyler Higbee, the run game, Darrell Henderson, Malcolm Brown, who are your favorite options from this game, and who do you not want at all?
Okay, so I definitely want to go back to the well with Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods. They both rank in the top 25 in true target share, and they're both in the top 40 of true weighted opportunity. So even though they're being used incredibly close to the line of scrimmage this year, even when you incorporate air yards into their usage, they're still top 40 wide receivers. And with a high implied total, as we keep mentioning, I'm trusting in Goff and his above average efficiency, especially when compared to his career averages. His price at quarterback 7 is the part that keeps me away. That's Goff at I will say. So I'm not sure I want to go there, especially when I think the running advantages exist in this game. But I certainly will have some Cup. I certainly will have some Woods. And if I'm a mass multi-entering, I certainly will have some situations where I stack them both. Higbee, I have trouble with him being considered an elite option on the main slate. He's tight end 3 on the main slate at 5,700. That's 17 points for a value play. We can certainly see it, right? We have a really high implied total. We have a team that has just been a sieve on defense. So it's certainly not out of the realm of possibilities, but it's expensive. So the Awesemo.com projection isn't too far off. It's tight end 6 for Higbee, but it's still a tough pill to swallow. So the ceiling is definitely there.
Okay. Let's get through 2 more games here. We're making it happen. 12-game slate. For those of you that are tuning in late or didn't know, Pittsburgh and Tennessee has been postponed until later in the season. So we did not forget about that. It has been postponed to later in the season. Someone asked in chat, where can I get ownership projections for all players? Well, I'm glad you asked, fella. Go to Awesemo.com. Go to Awesemo.com. We got all your ownership needs, all your player projection needs, lineup builder, fantasy cruncher add-on for those of you looking to MME and play multiple lineups and really make something of your DFS career, or even if it's a hobby, it's better to be good as a hobby than bad at one. Awesemo.com/join. Check that out. And we've got stuff for anybody from a $3.95 per week express pass to an all-access Awesemo Plus annual and the monthly and the all-access all-access weekly with PGA, NASCAR, MLB, NBA, NFL. If they have contests on DraftKings and FanDuel, we've got content, everything you need, the preeminent place to get your DFS information, content, and all of your tools from the legitimate #1 ranked DFS player that exists, Alex Baker. All of the tools are his. It's the real deal. We'll see you over there. Go to Awesemo.com/join. All right, that's my last plug for the day. Let's bang through these 2 games and head out. I need to eat something, Matt. I'm parched through my
I can't
water.
wait to eat.
I Las Vegas and Buffalo, baby. Let's make it happen. By the way, I'm impressed. You hang in every single week, 2 hours. You're lockstep, man. We're moving, and you're still spitting out good stats. You're not slowing down. I got to say, I'm impressed. What are you doing with the Raiders and the Buffalo Bills? Currently stands at 3 points. Buffalo laying 3 points, 49.5 point total here out in Las Vegas.
Yeah, so still a lot of respect for the Raiders here, even after they got outplayed really the entire game by the Patriots. But what else can we say about the Buffalo Bills just completely outperforming expectation, and it starts with Josh Allen. He's been 11th in EPA, that's expected points added per play, which is way higher than I had him projected at the beginning of the year. But most impressively, he's turning drives into touchdowns at the best rate in the league. When you regress it back for sample size, he is #1 in true drive success rate. Even when the going gets tough at the goal line, Allen is still delivering, exemplified best by this crazy sequence he had, I believe in the first or second quarter, right at the goal line. He threw 2 different touchdowns to Stephon Diggs. They got both called back. They got stuffed on 2 goal line runs, went for it on 4th down, and ended up throwing it to, I believe, a fullback or a 3rd string tight end. So Allen, and all credit is due to the offensive coordinator and coach Sean McDermott. They've really, really improved the offense overall with the introduction of Stephon Diggs. So I'm absolutely going back to the well with them. Huge implied total of 27 points. And if the Raiders, even though they have injuries on the receiving front, can come back in this game or stay with the Bills, assuming they continue to score, we could have a situation where we have a ton of opportunities and a ton of great plays from this game. I'm definitely going to use Allen in my player pool this week. Even though Stephon Diggs is up at wide receiver 5 in pricing, I still might have him. John Brown looks like he's going to miss again. I believe he has a toe injury, but Zach Moss does look like he's coming back. So Singletary was a very easy play last week with the late news that Moss was going to miss. The usage for his price was very good. Looks back to normal this week. So it's Diggs, maybe a little Gabriel Davis if John Brown misses. I'm looking here. He's still priced way down here in the 3,200, I believe, for him. So he could be an option there. He's their rookie receiver who came in and played admirably when Brown went down. But it's Allen, it's Diggs, and maybe a little bit of the running back sprinkled in tournaments.
One of the biggest differences you're seeing this year is that Josh Allen is actually connecting on the deep ball. You can't overstate how much of an impact Stefon Diggs has had, Matt. Like it's unbelievable. He's attempted, as far as deep attempts go, Josh Allen has attempted the 9th most deep attempts. He has completed the 2nd most deep balls, 20 plus yards, only because Aaron Rodgers has attempted 24 of them through 3 weeks and completed only 10. But Josh Allen's adjusted completion percentage on deep balls is north of 64%. Contrast that to last year in his rookie season. It's an incredible upgrade from what he's done. It's huge. He's evolved greatly. And I think we have Stefon Diggs in large part to thank for this, because he's not just a speed guy, but he's going to get open. He's going to run crisp routes, and he's going to make a quarterback's life a whole lot easier. So I'm always willing to go back to Diggs. The Diggs and Allen connection, I think, is going to be huge throughout the season. And, truly we might be looking at, I think we're going to see the best season ever from Stefon Diggs.
It's definitely in his range of outcomes, especially with no receiver even comparable to Adam Thielen across the field this year in Buffalo. That said, Cole Beasley still doing his usual typical underneath route, 6 receptions, 100 yards last week. It's not sexy, but especially in a higher volume, higher efficiency offense, production comes with that, and Beasley's seeing it too. He's actually 36 in true target share.
Yeah, Cole Beasley's been good. Definitely less concerning matchup for Diggs this week than it was last week against Ramsey and company, right? But I think things will open up a little bit more. But yes, you're right. Cole Beasley's going to get his 5 to 8 targets every single game, and he's going to rack up a few yards after the catch and make things happen. Do you have anything else here from either side that you want to dive into?
Sure. So one thing I will add is that the PFF net advantage grade that I look at ranks Buffalo as the top overall offensive advantage on the week. That basically just means get exposure to this offense. But if we assume that's the case, then we're also going to be running it back with the Raiders. And they have Darren Waller. He's still battling injury, but he certainly looks like he's going to play. I think you have to look at him and Josh Jacobs really as a secondary pass option, not only with his backfield usage, because of their injuries to their other receivers. Henry Ruggs looked great in week 1, got hurt in the first half, and really has not looked the same since. Bryan Edwards is now dealing with a high ankle sprain, and he's already going to miss this week. It's really hard to trust Nelson Aguilar or Zay Jones. Now, we're really digging deep. Zay Jones is the 100th priced wide receiver on the slate. So yes, the Awesemo.com projection is a little bit rosier than that. But again, that really is a dart throw play. Credit where credit is due to Derek Carr. He's really pumped up his efficiency in that same metric that we just praised Josh Allen for. He's number 7 in true drive success rate. That's really, really high, the best of his career so far this year. And 13th in the composite QB efficiency metric that I look at on our data deep dive. So he really isn't the best option, he really isn't the worst option this week, especially if he's forced into comeback mode by Allen and the Bills.
Yeah, this game can be a little sneaky. Last week, I mentioned to Matt Gajewski yesterday, nailed the Buffalo Bills being able to score at low ownership. No problems there, right? They threw up 35 points. Didn't nail who the balls were actually going to. Had a decent amount of Beasley, but you mentioned Diggs could have had 2 touchdowns in that game, could have blown things wide open. This is an opportunity for the Buffalo Bills to continue racking up points against the Vegas defense that I think is an upstart defense, and you're going to see them improve, but they're not as strong in the secondary as the LA Rams, and you're probably going to see that in the results once this game comes to a close. So I like Diggs. Someone asked in chat, can you stack Allen with 2 receivers? You can. Look, I don't have an issue with that. He's one of the guys, though, because of his ability to run, even though he hasn't been doing it that much, that I am willing to run with 1. But that's the offense is functioning a lot differently than it did over the past 2 years. If there was ever a season to stack him with two of his pass catchers, this would certainly be it.
Yeah, one mention about the running game still, they're not using him as much overall, but he still is a huge part of their goal line offense.
Right.
And as spectacular as Kyler Murray has been and Lamar Jackson always is, Josh Allen actually leads the position in avoided tackles as a rusher. So he's still as elusive as he's ever been, something worth looking at, especially if you're considering playing the running backs.
Last thing I'll throw out there, Buffalo Bills, according to Pro Football Focus, this might surprise some people, but their run defense ranks bottom 3, ranks 26th according to Football Outsiders. Two metrics, two grading systems that I have a decent amount of respect for, especially when used in tandem. That's not the most surprising thing. It is on the surface, but then once you look at the matchups, you got Miami, you had the New York Jets, and then got pretty beat up by the Rams on the ground. So I'm not opposed to running out Josh Jacobs here. Very simply, this man is a beast. He's getting unlimited opportunity to produce on the ground in a game that I think actually stays pretty competitive. He's going to get a ton of looks. 25 and 27 carries in 2 favorable game scripts over the first 2 weeks. Even last week, playing down by a lot, he touched the ball 19 times and was targeted 4 times in the passing game. Josh Jacobs, to me, at 6,800 is a very viable option here. I really thought that his ownership would be coming in pretty low, but it is, last I looked, it's actually somewhat high. Yeah, 21%. I still like Josh Jacobs, though. Wouldn't be surprised if his ownership actually comes down throughout the week. All right, Matt.
I do too.
Let's close it out. Kansas City, New England Patriots. Kansas City Chiefs, 7-point favorites, 54-point total. Patrick Mahomes is just virtually unstoppable, and we've seen that this season, particularly against a very good Baltimore defense. Now you've got him going up against the New England team that has shown some holes, but as I mentioned yesterday, I do anticipate their secondary buoying this defense as the season goes on. They're still very good. There's still some elite talents back there in the secondary. But does it really matter if Patrick Mahomes is the one throwing the football?
No, it doesn't. I mean, the Ravens are a perfect example. They just paid Marlon Humphrey, I believe, $66 million guaranteed this morning after getting torched by Kelsey.
I think the whole contract was $98 million.
Yeah, so the Ravens certainly aren't changing their idea of their secondary after getting just torched again by Patrick Mahomes. It very well could happen here to the Patriots defense. We do respect their secondary a little bit more. Well, I wouldn't say that, actually. Those are 2 of the best secondaries overall in just general respect. So, again, we're not nervous about Patrick Mahomes against any defense whatsoever. So the way that he's playing right now is an indicator that we play his offensive assets in all environments, in all game scripts. Even if the game total wasn't as high as it is, we would be expecting to play lots and lots of Chiefs. Of course, it starts, for me at least, with Travis Kelce as the first option I'm looking for, even though Tyreek Hill still has that slate-breaking ceiling, as we like to say. At wide receiver 4, he comes in very pricey, not to say that Kelce isn't, but I just want to highlight the amount of usage that you get with Kelce in this elite offense. Ranked 3rd at the position in target share, and in true weighted opportunity share, he's just 6th. So in this efficient offense with the way that Mahomes is playing, he's my first look. Clyde Edwards-Helaire still priced relatively fairly at running back 10. The Awesemo.com projections actually have him a little bit higher than that, running back 7. He's going to need a great week, about 19.2 points for value. But I think with the amount of touchdowns, so the amount of points in general we have implied, I'm completely fine playing Edwards-Helaire. When we talk about volume of offense, Sammy Watkins is still in play just because of the total opportunities that he could have. And then on the other side of the ball, we still need to talk about Julian Edelman as this alpha wide receiver. He ranks 14th in overall high-value touches and 10th at the position in true target share. So he's still being completely fed. He's an elite option for Cam Newton, despite the massive game from Rex Burkhead tilting many a fantasy gamer last week. Are we seeing that James White is going to be playing this week? Did he return to practice?
I don't know yet. There hadn't been a ton of reports on him, but I can tell you right now, James White rejoined practice yesterday. Yeah.
Okay, so that's probably an indicator that he's playing, and an indicator that I'm staying away from Burkhead, White, and likely Michelle. Though it was really great to see him get over the 100-yard mark last week.
Yeah, it was, but he still looked pretty slow. I'm a little bit more bullish on Tyreek Hill than you are for tournaments. And one of the reasons, like, yes, he's the fourth highest priced receiver, but he's also $1,600 less expensive than the highest priced receiver and only $900 more expensive than the 20th priced receiver. The outside of Hopkins and Thomas, it's just really, really flat pricing. You know, you look at it, Hill, Metcalf, Diggs, Robinson, Cooper, Kupp, Thielen, Allen, Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, they're all $500 separated. So I think I can get there. And Tyreek Hill, he can take the top off of any defense. And that's what I love about him. He's had some monster games against Stephon Gilmore and this Chiefs team. Now, last year, they did a decent job bracketing him, but I still think it's going to be difficult. If you think that's what's going to happen, then you should be all over Kelsey because Patrick Mahomes is going to find ways to move the football. But at sub 7% ownership in tournaments, at sub 7K, Tyreek Hill has the ability, when you talk about tournament winning upside, slate breaking upside, he can do it. He can absolutely do it if he gets some deep targets, which Patrick Mahomes. The thing about good coverage on Tyreek Hill is that Patrick Mahomes will drop the ball into the only place the defender isn't and the receiver is. So exactly. 69 I still think is a little bit too cheap. He opened the season $1,000 more expensive, and now he's at 69. Clearly matchup based. DraftKings will price guys based on who they're facing, but I think he had like 180-yard, 3-touchdown game against this same secondary not long ago. Tyreek Hill would be a guy I'm looking at, and I really like Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I don't want to play these guys in the same lineup, obviously, but I love Clyde Edwards-Helaire. The biggest weakness of this Patriots team is going to be their run defense, presumably all season long. They lost players to COVID, to opting out. They lost players to injuries. They lost Van Noy. I think linebackers and the front and the defensive line are going to continue to get gashed. And Clyde Edwards-Helaire, in games where they have been playing with the lead or even without it, the great thing about him is he had 20 attempts last game, but 6 targets in a game that they led easily throughout. Like, there was no concern there throughout the entirety of that game. Remember, he had no receptions in week 1, and everyone's like, oh, man, what's going on? Although he had 25 carries.
And 7 goal line looks.
Exactly. And then 10 attempts in week 2, but 8 targets and 6 receptions. He's your feature back. He's going to do it all. So anytime you get him as a 7.5-point favorite against the Patriots team, that, who knows, maybe they will slow Patrick Mahomes down. I don't think they can slow Clyde Edwards-Helaire down. At 6,400, it's a pretty egregious price point. I'd probably pay $7K for him this week. All right, Matt, we got about a minute to go. Close it out. Final thoughts on these 12 games. Any strategy tips or anything you forgot to mention?
Yeah, I really think that we went fast through it, but the LA Rams present a ton of value here against a New York Giants team that got outclassed by Nick Mullins last week. No discredit to Nick Mullins. He actually played quite well, but I just see a lot of efficiency and a lot of production from that game. Also, don't be afraid to go to the second, third, or fourth highest game total of the week because the totals are high everywhere. We've got a ton over 50, some over 55. So there's a lot of great game environments to get excited about. I really think that just to finish this Chiefs game as well, we should mention Damiere Byrd, who's still priced way down, but is actually up in the 50s of true weighted opportunity. He's a value option. He's certainly not the best play there, but I just wanted to mention that before we completely move on there.
That'll do it for us. 12 up, 12 down. Again, follow Matt Savoca on Twitter, Draftaholic. If you're not following me yet, at Laffy_D, LOUGHY_D. Hey, We love you guys. Thanks for hanging out. 2 hours up and down. Many of you sticking with us all the way through it. We're getting ready to win some money this week, and sometimes you just got to grind to make that happen. Check us out at awesemo.com, awesemo_com. We'll catch you back here tomorrow, Friday, NFL Strategy Show, presented by awesemo.com.